Afternoon and welcome everybody to the third episode of our series Online with our Experts that we are hosting here at Aracari. For those who don't know me, my name is Marisol Mosquera and I'm the owner and founder of Aracari, a company I founded with a mission of sharing knowledge and experiences from our country and region, the Andes, with the world, by means of connecting you to the best that our countries have to offer. I am therefore honored today to introduce you to a friend from way back, Dr. Jean-Jacques Decoster, anthropologist who will be discussing with us memory, identity, and cultural heritage of Machu Picchu. Jean-Jacques and I met many years ago in Cusco, and since then he has collaborated with Aracari. Jean-Jacques accompanies our guests to specialist visits of Machu Picchu and also lectures, providing additional insights in matters related to archaeology and anthropology of the Andes. Jean-Jacques is deeply connected to Cusco, where he came for the first time many years ago, well, a few years ago, when he was doing his field work for his PhD in anthropology at Cornell University on pre-colonial influences in contemporary Andean social structure. After a life and work in diverse countries such as the United Kingdom, the USA, Ghana, and Ecuador, French-born Jean-Jacques has been living in Cusco for the last 22 years, where he has been the director.
Instalación de agua, 430,40. Servicio de desagüe, instalación de desagüe.
Peter, give me 1 second. Can you please mute yourself? Can you please mute yourself, whoever? Hold on a second.
Peter, mute it.
Okay. Yeah, done. Okay, so Jean-Jacques lived and worked for many years in the UK, USA, Ghana, and Ecuador. And then he's been living in Cusco for the last 22 years, where he has been the director of the Museo Casa Concha in Cusco, which houses the objects that were found in Machu Picchu. He has collaborated and collaborates in diverse consultancy projects in the fields of Andean archaeology and anthropology. And currently he lectures at San Antonio Abad University. He is also, by the way, the French Consul in Cusco. Today, in this fascinating presentation, Memory, Identity, and Cultural Heritage, Jean-Jacques will give us insights that will help us understand further the magic and the historical significant Inca site. Before I hand over to Jean-Jacques, a few housekeeping matters, as we already saw. Please keep your microphones on mute so to avoid background noise. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and my colleague Monica will be answering them, will be handing them over, reading them over to Jean-Jacques at the end of the presentation. And just to let you know, this talk is recorded and the recording will be available to you. We will send it to you in the next few days. So without further ado, I would be very happy to introduce you to Jean-Jacques. Jean-Jacques, all yours.
Thank you very much, Marisol. So first of all, I want to thank Marisol Mosquera and the Aracari team for this invitation. As Marisol said, we go way back, and I hope that this relationship we have developed over the years will never stop. And even at a distance, as it is today, I myself in Cusco, Marisol is in Lucca, and God knows where everybody else is, and we can still have a friendly conversation over the distance. So thank you again for the invitation. For those of you who were able to participate in the excellent presentation of my colleague Peter Frost 2 weeks ago on the royal estates of the Incas, you were privileged to be given a concise talk on Inca history, their social organization, and the structures of their conquest of the region. I want to start from a different point of view, perhaps less directly scientific, and talk instead of the idea of time and memory and cultural identity. Simply put, this has everything to do with what we think we know about the Incas and where we might be totally wrong about them. Simply put, again, the notion of time that the Incas used was completely different from the Western lineal time that the European used at the time and brought to the Americas. And that has become the standard of measure the world over. Time flowing in a continuous line with a starting point, year one in the Western calendar, and peppered with dates of battles and kings that help us keep track of time, of this movement along a continuous line. The Incas and other groups in the region and many other cultures throughout the world use rather a cyclical way of looking at time, with the daily cycle of day and night, the lunar month, the solar year, and they kept track of that time, not the lineal one, through astronomical observation and rituals and myth. So the knowledge we have of the Incas and other Andean cultures is already a form of violence done to those as we try to fit one way of thinking and organizing the world into another. All the knowledge we have of the Andean past, collected from the living memory of the old Incas who were interviewed by the conquistadores, all this knowledge has already been filtered through an attempt to fit this cyclical perception into another historical one. All early chronicles participate in that attempt to create a chronology that parallels European time, and as such is already transformed into something distorted, even as we try to articulate this with our own idea of world history. This imposition of time that has reduced and transformed, again, a specific reality, that of Andean culture, into something that we can discuss and share, but might already be transformed and distorted. This imposition of time as a form of violence, as I see it, is only one of the many forms of violence that the Europeans brought upon the indigenous people they encountered here. More obvious examples of this relation of power and of extreme violence is the genocide that takes place here in South America at the beginning of the 16th century. It is usually believed that 90% of the population of the Andes dies within the first generation after conquest, mostly of disease, but also of direct physical violence. And also what we refer to as the destructuration and the systematic destruction of society, but also of sites and architectural constructions in the region. With Machu Picchu, we actually have one rare example of a site that was not destroyed or transformed or reused. Do I have to do this here? Okay, or reused by the colonial power. In fact, there is no evidence that the Spaniards ever went to Machu Picchu during the near 300 years that lasted the colonial and virreinal administration over the Andean region. In fact, you have to go all the way or wait all the way until the beginning of the 20th century to get to what I call the invention of Machu Picchu rather than the discovery. This is a personal joke. This is me on my first visit to Machu Picchu many years ago. And this is another good-looking young man, Hiram Bingham, who is credited, and rightly so, actually, as being the scientific discoverer of Machu Picchu. The debate over whether Bingham discovered anything at all is behind us now. We came across this way of dealing with that by referring to him as the scientific discoverer of Machu Picchu, because in fact he is the one, and should get credit for that, who really, as we said, say in Spanish, discovered the Machu Picchu to the world. He's the one who, with help from the National Geographic Society, but also coming from a very keen instinct towards self-publicity, Hiram Bingham is the one who really transformed or made Machu Picchu known to the world in 1913 with the publication of the National Geographic issue of April 1913. But here, so a question of technology here. I don't know if everybody has the same view as I do, but I have a series of squares on the right of the screen, and this is blocking some of the lettering on my screen. Is everybody seeing the same, and is there a way to fix that?
No, I can see you. I can see the full screen myself, okay, and I can see you on the side, so it's okay.
Good. So Bingham came as a young man to South America. He was initially he was a student of Latin American history, and initially was interested in Simon Bolivar and the history of Venezuela, and he came nearly by chance to Cusco on the way to another congress. And he became interested not so much in the old stones in Cusco, but in the story that he kept hearing about a movement of resistance to conquest led by one Inca who fled into the jungle and for 40 years led guerrilla warfare against the Spaniards in a place called Vilcabamba or Espiritu Pampa. So everybody knew the story because this had been reported in what we call the chronicles in the early early writings by the Spaniards about the Andes and the Incas, but nobody at the time, we're talking about a bit over 100 years ago, nobody knew where that place, Vilcabamba, was. So he starts looking for this lost city of the Incas, and in doing so, he will actually come across some of the sites that Peter mentioned last time, Choquequirao, Bitcos, and even he will end up finding the actual place that he's looking for, Vilcabamba, the last refuge of the Incas, of that government in exile, but it doesn't recognize it as for what it is. It doesn't look royal enough for him. So he keeps looking for the last city or the lost city of the Incas, and he goes back to Cusco and has a meeting with another amazing young American, Albert Giesecke from Pennsylvania, who had come to Peru as an aide, as an advisor on educational matters, and ends up being handpicked by the president of Peru to become the president of the university where I work now in Cusco, UNSAC. At the ripe age of 27, Albert Giesecke becomes the president of a major university in South America. And so Bingham decides to look him up. They're both, from the same Ivy League background. They're both young Americans, and they so they have a meeting where Giesecke's Bingham explains what he's looking for. He's looking for the lost city of the Incas. And Giesecke says, look, I just heard about a place in the canyon of the Urubamba. I don't have time to go there myself, but this might be what you're looking for. And so sure enough, Bingham organizes an expedition. This is a photo taken by Bingham and colorized at the beginning of the 20th century, and for those who know the region, this is actually the actual train tracks going with La Veronica here. This is the Urubamba River, and so Machu Picchu is behind my back. And Ollantaytambo and La Veronica over there. So he will follow the indications given by Giesecke. Will follow the valley of Urubamba all the way to Machu Picchu and cross the river. You no longer have to do that now. There's a bridge that's been built right there, and will hire a young boy who is famous to us anyway. This is Pablito Recharte, who will charge Bingham one sol to take him from the river valley all the way to this funny site with the old stones. So on that first visit, now, for those who know the site, this is Intihuatana, and Sargento Carrasco, who is leaning on this, couldn't do that today. The whole place has been cordoned off. But on that first visit in 1911, Bingham doesn't stay there very long. It draws this very crude map of what he calls the sacred plaza, and writes down in his diary, Machu Picchu wine and picchu, Machu Picchu wine and picchu. The mules ran away. I had to run after them. And this is it, it's gone. He spent a total of 6 hours in Machu Picchu and was not overly impressed by the place. Goes back to Yale, and then things change for him. He's starting to put together a new team to start a new expedition to South America. That wouldn't have included Machu Picchu initially. And he gets some funding, not just from his university, to the great relief of his in-laws. Bingham had married into the Tiffany family. So the father-in-law has been footing his bills for a while. But he finally gets funding from Yale, and more importantly from the National Geographic, which will allow him to go back to South America. And he, in the meantime, he abandons the plans that he had of trying to identify the highest mountain, the Coporuna, which was thought to be the highest mountain in South America at the time, when on the way to Peru, he gets the news that a woman had just successfully climbed the same mountain. So he goes, no, what's the point, right? So he decides instead to go back to Machu Picchu. He's not the first person to visit Machu Picchu, nor the first non-Peruvian. Actually, there is some evidence of Europeans being there in the 19th century, and with a license from the Peruvian government to exploit antiquities and timber. So basically, a license to loot. And there's those people even managed to draw maps of where the toponyms can be recognized. Point Huaca Inca here. This is the map drawn by Burns, and Hermann Goering. A name easy to remember, although he has apparently no connection with the Nazi minister. Hermann Goering does this beautiful map of the Urubamba Valley in 1874, where he actually puts the location of Machu Picchu and Huayna Picchu on the map. So, and there for a long time, there was a debate on the part of Cusqueños saying Bingham didn't discover anything. There was, some of us had been there before, but there's no great glory in having carved one's name or written one's name in charcoal, as was the case of Agostino Lizarragua. In fact, Bingham does give him credit, and then promptly erases the graffiti from the wall of the temple. What I want to talk about here is what comes next, and as I said, the accidents of Bingham being subventioned by by Gilbert Grosvenor, who was the president of the National Geographic Society at the time, had a direct consequence, because this is the first time in the history of the magazine that you have one issue And maybe the last one, I don't know, one issue of the National Geographic Society magazine dedicated to one site, and this site is Machu Picchu. Eh? So, and it's full of these beautiful black and white photos taken by Hiram Bingham, with the Putukusi here and Huayna Picchu. This shot is taken from Machu Picchu looking across to Huayna Picchu. Right? And therefore, the Inca site is right here, although you can't see it. And this in itself might explain the lack of interest that Bingham had when he had first visited the previous year. Look at this here. This is in the same angle, right? Looking at Huayna Picchu, but look, these are two shots, basically the same shot, while Bingham was busy clearing the site. His odd relationship with the president of Peru, the same one who had appointed Giseke as university president, had given Bingham one squadron of soldiers to help him clear up the place. But this is taking most of Bingham's time, and he has a fairly narrow window. He has to be done in 5 months. So at the end of that, and he's not finding anything. He's not finding what he's looking for. He's expecting to find the treasure of the Incas in what he considers to be the lost city of the Incas, because in the meantime, he has convinced himself that Machu Picchu is what he'd been looking for. So he decides to take a shortcut. This is him. He was very much into selfies before his time. A very careful photographer, always used a tripod. And as I said, did a lot of self-portraits. So that's him looking very much like an archaeologist. And so what he decides to do is he promises his crew, again, one soul for the contents of all, of any grave that they would come across. He figures that if there's anything of value, it will be buried somewhere. And so they take off in all directions, and they will identify more than 200 grave sites. But these are graves, not tombs. Those are shallow graves under big rocks. This is one in Machu Picchu itself. And this is a two-seater here at the edge of the site. And but he's getting more and more frustrated because he's not finding very much of value. Even those 200, I think it's exact 211 grave sites only contain human remains and very few objects, more like pots and pans, if you want, because indeed those are not royal tombs. There was no royal or no elite population in Machu Picchu, as Peter signaled in his talk 2 weeks ago. In fact, Machu Picchu was not a place of residence. It was not a city like Cusco was, but it was rather a place where the king would go once in a while, carried all the way from Cusco. It's a 4 or 5 day hike, and he didn't have to hike it. He was being carried all the way there. He would throw a big party, and then a few weeks later go back to Cusco, and the people who stayed behind to clean up the mess and plant the new crops those were the people who lived and died in Machu Picchu, and whose remained was buried in these shallow graves. So the other, or the first perhaps of those strange things that happened to the expedition and to what used to be known as the Yale Harry Bingham collection is the fact that Bingham has the permit by the same Peruvian president to take everything back to the US. And this in spite of Peruvian laws that had prohibited the exportation of archaeological remains for several generations. So in fact, Bingham is so nervous about that instead of going back through Lima, which is the port he had come in through, he will take another route through Bolivia and Argentina, convinced that if he'd go overland to Lima, he would probably be assaulted by the Peruvians, who were already quite annoyed at the news of what was going on. So not only is he allowed to take back everything that he has excavated in Machu Picchu, and when I say everything, he was in such a hurry that he didn't even have time to sieve most of what he had collected, and so he packs everything, the dirt and the potsherd, and takes all that back to Yale, so that presumably he'll be able to study the stuff later. He will come back and twice more, and there is another shipment of goods, of stuff that he will take back, send back to Yale in 1916 under different conditions, and I will get back to that in a minute. He had for the excavation, he had actually signed a contract with the government for the return of the objects of that 1912 expedition, that said basically that he should return the stuff anytime the Peruvians would ask for it. Anytime the Peruvians should ask for it. And it's happened that in 1920, he gets a letter from the Peruvian consul in the US, and with that letter in hand, he walks into the office of the president of Yale, and he says, "Sorry, but they want it back. We have to send everything back to Peru," and that's where the Yale lawyers come into the picture, and Yale lawyers are extremely good. That's their job, to protect what they see as the interests of their institution. They say, hold your horses. Let's see. Let's just ask for a delay and see what happens. And they do, and nothing happens. And for the next 80 years or so, nothing will happen. And the collection, the Machu Picchu collection, will remain in the Peabody Museum at Yale. Yeah? And these are also photos taken in the Peabody Museum of these objects from Machu Picchu that were exhibited and actually put online also all the way into the beginning of the 21st century, until two of the curators, Richard Berger and his wife, Lucy Salazar, decide to do an itinerant exhibit of that collection throughout the US, so from New Haven to California by way of Colorado. And somewhere along the way, some Peruvians living in the US went, what's going on here? Shouldn't that be, back home? And so there is a grassroots movement that starts like this little old lady who says, Yale, give back what you took. And there is a grassroots movement at the time. Alejandro Toledo is president of Peru, and it starts talks with Yale. In 2005, National Geographic recognizes Peru is the rightful owner of those pieces, and Yale, under pressure of its own students and the alumni, does the same and says that the collection does belong to Peru, and so right away they offer a memorandum of understanding, which is absolutely crazy, where Yale says, okay, we understand, the stuff is yours, but we're going to keep it another 19 years, and at the end we'll return half of the pieces to you. So the Peruvians blow their top at that. Basically, they say this is ridiculous. We're just going to go to court, and so they start a legal process in DC. DC being the capital of the U.S. The Peruvian lawyers think that this is the right place to do that, and this is where again the Yale lawyers come out and say, no, this is not a federal stuff. Why don't we move that, a change of venue to Hartford, and because this is a state. Hartford is the capital of Connecticut. This is where Yale is, and all that. The Peruvians accept that, and as soon as they do, Yale says, aha, according to the Connecticut Constitution, there is a statute of limitation, and therefore we don't owe you anything. This is where things get heated, and the Peruvian government really puts the pressure on Yale, and in the end, I think I've got that right. Obama even gets involved, but there's a new memorandum of understanding where Yale accepts to return everything, and this is the inventory that they do. This is a very strange item. 1,000 lots relating to fauna. I have no idea what this refers to. And so the memorandum of understanding is approved and signed by the two parties, which are, this is not two governments, but it is Yale on the one side and the government of Peru on the other side. And so eventually the collection will be returned to under the government of Alan Garcia. It's 127 boxes, all that paid for by Yale. Each one of these boxes costs $500 to make. The DHL will pay for transport to Lima and then on to Cusco, and it's a big deal. It's like the treasure of the Incas is coming home, and this is the day when this happens in Cusco, and even the Incas come out of hiding to receive the collection. The two presidents, that's my president at the time at UNSAC, and this is Levin, president of Yale. So there's three shipments. The first shipment is the most important, 329. This is a very small collection, 329 museum quality pieces out of this huge inventory. And but everything is shipped and received. And this is me there. Part of the memorandum of understanding is that we, the university in Cusco, would put up a building where to receive the collection. So we would create a museum, and it so happened that we were restoring a colonial building near the Plaza de Armas. So this is what is going to be transformed into the Machu Picchu Casa Concha Museum this year. And all those pieces will be part of the permanent collection. So it's a strange process that will involve Yale on the one hand, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Peru, and from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the stuff is given to the Ministry of Culture, and the Ministry of Culture will lend it for 50 years to the university under specific conditions that we're not really keeping up. Okay, so all right, now just a few words about the idea of a museum. The idea of the museum in Europe initially is linked to the idea of the bizarre, of the exotic, what was then called a cabinet of curiosities, the bizarre, the exotic, and in large measure the concept of domination and ownership derived from the history of colonialism. In many cases, collections of museums like the British Museum or the Louvre in Paris, or the Museum del Trocadero also in Paris, were being created by looting the colonized territories. So there's that need to subtract from the conquered, from the dominated lands, elements that may or may not have had a commercial value, partly corresponds to the necessity, to the necessary exotization of the colonial other, or as a post facto justification of the colonization of an inferior group by one that was considered higher on. And so this idea of the exotic didn't stop at objects and even individuals, like this Venus Hottentot, who was a woman from what is now South Africa. Her body was kept for a long time in the Musée de l'Homme in Paris. Now, what we have, of course, right now is a movement, is a movement to rectify that, and there's a lot of ex-colonies that are asking for the stuff back, and the French have started a devolution, a return of objects to some of their old colonies, like the case of Togo, for instance. Now, the relation between Yale and Machu Picchu was not one of a colonial power and a colonized people. And this is what actually was signaled when the whole process of the return of the collection was started, and it was signaled by some commentators as a sign of success, where it's the first case of the return of a collection that did not go from a colonized or colonial power to an ex-colony. And so that certainly was unique in the case of Machu Picchu and Yale. But even if you don't have this hierarchical relation of the colonial power and the colonized people, there is this sense of superiority on the part of Yale that is taking care of the object in lieu or in place of the Peruvians who were deemed unable to do that. So there's that sense of paternalism that is involved in this caretaking, if you want, of the collection. This, of course, didn't fly at the beginning of the 21st century when Peruvians had suddenly developed enough know-how and human experience and to deal with that. So that's this relation of hierarchy doesn't stop there. Yale doesn't really return the things very willingly. And the two curators that I mentioned before actually will, in a parallel way to the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding, write a new contract with the University of San Antonio, where I work, so that they will create a committee of, what's the word, oversight of the museum that will be occupied by those Yale archaeologists. Okay, so there's something else that I want to touch on, and it's the idea itself of the museum. I started off by talking about the imposition of a certain logic on a culture and the transformation of the knowledge about this culture through a Eurocentric perception. Now, all museums, what I want to express is that a museum is not an innocent display of stuff. There is a message that is being carried, which can be sometimes very forceful, sometimes very controversial, and this goes for art museum as well as for ethnographic museum. There is the catalog, or there's the guide, the museum guide that will organize the discourse about the museum or the collection in a way that is not neutral or is not objective, and no discourse is ever neutral or objective in my sense, but the curator's guide is a bit like the movie maker's final cut. The curators is who will give a sense, a meaning to the exposition, and literally a sense, so that in the sense of the visit at the Museo Machu Picchu Casa Concha, the first thing that you see, the first room where you are being guided into by those arrows, has a life-size papier-mâché statue of Hiram Bingham doing an excavation in Machu Picchu. Yeah? So in a sense, there is a deliberate ignorance on the part of the curators of at least part of their public. This collection, I should also signal that what is being returned to Machu Picchu, sorry, to Cusco in that sense, it's not 319 or 321, sorry, 329, I think, objects, separate object. It is the collection, the very same traveling exhibits that they had put together. So it just comes and it's plugged into place in the museum. All the panels have been written from Yale. There are videos of Richard Berger and Lucy Salazar throughout the visit, so that the discourse that is being used, these are photos taken by Hiram Bingham, the whole discourse that is being expressed through this guided visit is to the glory of Yale and of Hiram Bingham. So
I hate to rush you, but where we have a few questions. I don't know how
I'm sorry, you're right. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Yes, just a couple of more minutes. There is as I say, everything was made in New Haven, and they even brought a plexiglass Inca wall as part of the display, as if this is the kind of stuff that we need in Cusco, right? Okay, so yes, so this is pretty much where I wanted to end, and that in fact Bingham should get credit for this, that the value of the collection is important in terms of the context of the return, but also that what I presented as the museum as a colonial as an instrument of colonial power, it didn't really go away, and we're still in a situation where where the museum is projecting a certain kind of discourse in a language that is proper to say international knowledge and science and history and archaeology, and the irony is that a lot of the objects have to do with traditional Inca ways of collecting knowledge and transmitting knowledge, but all this is being done through a media that has nothing to do with these non-written ways of storing knowledge and communicating it. Okay, so sorry, Marisol, for...
No, it's okay. Thank you for a fascinating lecture about this matter and going in depth into the return of these objects. I have been to the exhibition in Lima when it came back, and this is a fascinating account of it. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of questions. So Monica, my colleague, is going to read them out to you. They've been put on the chat. Monica, can you read them out?
Yes, happily. Thank you, everybody, for participating. And we do have a question here from your esteemed colleague and our friend Peter Frost. Peter, I've unmuted you if you would like to ask Mr. Decoster directly.
Keep him muted. No,
keep him muted. All right, happy.
No, come on, Peter.
Actually, I wrote it down, Monica, so
I'm happy to read it.
Hi, Peter.
Let's see, what did I say? I need to look up the chat to see what I wrote.
All right, I'll ask for you. I just didn't want to take your voice. Peter asks if you have any thoughts about how the Inca cyclical view of time should affect our interpretation of Machu Picchu and other Inca sites.
Good. let me start by saying that you know what I was talking about. I was saying that the only source of knowledge we have is through that distorted writing from perception of time and past and memory into another way of conceiving a time. But I should also have said that the other source of knowledge is through the archaeological remains, and this is the place where, in fact, too often our understanding or our study of archaeological site is too influenced by what we think we know about the Incas, and especially the early writing. I think that we should really study the archaeology from scratch and start from that, and not when you visit Machu Picchu, you are again, we can blame Bingham for that. You'll be taken from the Temple of the Sun to the King's Palace to the astronomical clock, the Intihuatana. So all those concepts are imposed onto the archaeology of the site when it should be the other way around. Peter, I think that what you and I know, and a lot of our colleagues also, is that Machu Picchu, among many other things, had a relation with astronomical observation, and certainly we know that the observation of time in what we call horizon astronomy, where in fact the location of Machu Picchu itself is perfect for this kind of astronomical observation, as opposed to the zenith astronomy that you can only do, or the only astronomical observation you can do in a flat region or in the jungle is by looking straight up to the movement of the sun. Machu Picchu, like Cusco, is perfect for the kind of horizon observation on the tip of the mountains, and there's enough study of archaeoastronomy that was done by colleagues starting in the 1980s and all the way to the present that have been that have shown that Incas were following the movement of the stars, the sun and the moon along the top of the ridge. Not this ridge, that ridge on the right-hand side, rather. So.
Monica, do we have more questions?
We do. We have one question here from our participant, Adriana Cucho, who says, good afternoon, and would like for you to help her understand a bit more about the garbage chutes and toilets for commoners and upper class people at Machu Picchu, if these existed.
if. Well, I'll respond to that from my own experience as an ethnographer in Andean communities. When in my experience in Andean communities, there is no such thing as latrines, shower, or any such. And people actually don't spend much time inside the house, and everything else takes place, and that includes. Oh, I think my dog is ready to puke. ¿Qué pasa, mi amor? So I don't think there were toilets in Machu Picchu, not for the king and not for anybody else. What was often referred to as the Incas' house, as far as I can tell, there is a drainage pipe that takes, but it's not necessarily. I don't think this was related to bodily functions, frankly.
Thank you.
One more from Mr. Mervyn Samuel, who would like to know, what do the human remains found at Machu Picchu tell us about its inhabitants?
Good. All those actually, I don't know if I showed you a photo of that, but they're all kept in storage in the Museo Machu Picchu Casa Concha. They were studied. There is an interesting story behind that, and Bingham, who had brought with him an osteologist, Dr. Eaton, in that 1912 expedition. And Eaton was in charge of doing the analysis of the human remains. And so back then, the technology to do that was basically visual analysis. And he would go male, female, male, female. And he came up with a figure that said that 80% of the skeletons were female. And so this gave birth to the myth of Machu Picchu being like the nunnery in the clouds, inhabited by mostly women, and that the remains were those. In the 1980s or 1990s, a colleague from Tulane University, John Verano, went to Yale and had access to the collection that was still kept at the Peabody at the time, and also had access to DNA analysis, and he ran the whole collection through that, and came up with a normal population of 50-50 individuals. I know that Lucy Salazar also claims that those were Incas, but it's very difficult to define, to determine the identity, the ethnic identity of dead bones, given that ethnic identity doesn't leave any trace on the bones, right? It is much more probable than the people who lived and died in Machu Picchu were not of the Inca elite, and were rather from provincial groups that had been put in charge of the upkeep of Machu Picchu, and as part of the routine tribute that people had to do for the state, some of the tribute being paid in labor, and so we can only come to a partial conclusion by looking at the objects that were buried with these individuals. None of these objects are from Inca elite. Some of them are from, let's say, non-Inca, non-elite Inca stuff. But there's also evidence of regional non-Inca objects in that. So this is my way of saying I don't know.
Okay. I don't know if we have time for one more, or we have one more,
and then we will wrap up. Yeah.
Okay. From Mr. Guillaume de Vaudrey, he would love to know if there are still descendants of the Incas who escaped at the arrival of the Spaniards, and perhaps are still living in the depths of the Peruvian jungle in protected areas.
This is lovely. This is the story of Paititi and the story of the Temple du Soleil that Hergé put into book form. The idea of Paititi is originally, I think, an Inca or an Andean myth, and what I would call a myth of conquest. Some people talk about millenarism, meaning that when a group has been conquered, and nearly destroyed, as was the case of the Incas, by a dominating and extremely violent a civilization or group of individuals that you can't even talk about civilization when you refer to the conquistadores. So there is a reaction that may involve the myth, and in that case, Paititi talks about the fact that the Incas didn't die. Some of them escaped and are still living today deep into the jungle. There are people and who are actually looking for Paititi even to this day. I think Paititi is a myth of resistance, in a sense, saying we're not dead, we can't accept this reality. There's another reality back there, and also based in a way on a historical reality, which is the story that I told before of Manco Inca fleeing into Vilcabamba and staying there until he was forcefully one of his sons was forcefully captured and brought back to Cusco, which put an end to the conquest of the Incas.
That would be another.
I would like to refer to one of the best books on the topic, which is Hemming. Thank you. The Conquest of the Incas, and it's one of the best books written on this period.
Jean-Jacques, thank you.
And what Peter has written, of course.
Monica, that's it, right? There's no more.
Yeah, we have one more question from Kiki Barron, who would love to know what Machu Picchu was used for besides as a party town of the king.
Okay, this goes back a bit to what I said in my introduction, that we should not use our own mental categories to determine the mental structures or social structures of other groups. So since the Greeks, we've been dividing our reality between mathematics, philosophy, governments, justice, religion, witchcraft, and all that. And those are our astronomy. Those are our own categories. I believe that the Incas didn't divide their world and their worldview quite the same way as we did. And this is something to come back to Peter's remark earlier on, that applies to a lot of the sites of the Inca sites that I know, where there is no single function of the site, but it's not, you know, there was no division between church and state, or between the military and the religious, and so all those functions were probably woven together in the social and cultural life of the Incas. And so Machu Picchu was a religious center, was an astronomical center, was probably a fortress and a stepping stone towards the jungle as a way of starting on that huge conquest of the territory. And all that rolled into one.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and Monica. I think that's
I
it.
think
right?
that was everybody says thank you for answering their questions.
And Jean-Jacques, thank you so much for participating for this wonderful talk. It's fantastic. So I think we're gonna wrap up now. If you want to just say a couple of words before you have to go back to your dog.
I have to take care of Sarah. So, yeah. No, thank you very much for making me part of this, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And I'm sorry I really went over. No,
don't worry. And next week, to everybody that has joined in, thank you for tuning in from the different parts of the world. And for those who I see every week, I'm happy to see you again. And talking about, you know, cultural differences and change of paradigm, et cetera. Next week, we've got a wonderful virtual tour precisely of the Cathedral of Lima and Santo Domingo Church, which will be conducted in Spanish by architect Luis Villacorta, who's an expert in colonial architecture. So a very, very appropriate continuation to this conversation. Thank you everybody for participating, and tomorrow we will be sending you the recording for all of those who want to replay it or share it. And very happy to have you here. Thank you very much, Jean-Jacques. Everybody, thank you and have a good.
Bye.
Bye.